Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Sunday. Welcome to another session of Lens with Advanced Design. My name is Hector Silva, and today we have the pleasure of having our next guest, Nikolas Bentel. Nicholas, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time to share your work and your journey as a designer and artist. A little bit about Nicholas is he's an artist, he's a designer, and he's a performing artist based in New York City who creates objects that engage the public to think critically about their surrounding physical and cultural environments, creating a variety of exciting but strange experiences using alternate forms of design, advertising, and performing arts. Nicholas has exhibited around the world in places such as Paris Fashion Week, Milan Design Week, and the United Nations Climate Summit. Nicholas graduated from Brown University and Rhode Island School of Design dual degree program, where he received a BFA in product design at RISD and a BA in modern culture and media studies at Brown. He is currently finishing his master's of architecture degree at Columbia University, and most recently, he launched a product at Areaware, which I was very excited about, called Doodle Crayons. That being said, Nicholas, the floor is all yours. Thank you for being here. For those who are watching and tuning in, thank you. Please ask questions in the Q&A section, and I will make sure that we integrate them in our conversation with Nick after his presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hector. This is a really nice and unique opportunity just to talk over Zoom. I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. So can everyone see a spinning head, I guess? Do you see it?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick, and basically my goal is to make products that are not for mass production per se, but products that are storytelling objects. Objects that try to engage the public to think a little bit more critically about where they come from, how they're made, and the cultural meaning behind some of these objects. So to make this a little clearer, I'm going to dive into a few of my projects. For starters, this project is called the Scrap Stool. It is a stool made entirely from scrap paper, giving new life to the material. Basically, the goal was to redesign the process of how books is manufactured. So when a large children's book is made, the ends need to be cut down to size. Instead of tossing these scraps, they are dropped into a specially designed bucket with a little bit of resin, creating a stool that can hold up to about 200 pounds.
Hey, Nick, don't want to interrupt. I don't think we can see the next slide. Oh, there you go.
Oh,
there you go.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so this is the Scrap Stool. They're advancing, correct? The slides.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So the idea is that it's normal paper, but by bundling it up together, the stool is strong enough to hold up a large person. It was shown at a few places over the years, Milan Design Week a few years ago with Meet My Projects, and Pulse Art Fair at Miami with Young Arts. The next is the Loopy bike rack chair. We all know those Loopy bike racks at your local neighborhood park. What if the manufacturing of these pipes are repurposed for another object, let's say a chair? The system of manufacturing is already in place. Why not use it? In doing this, the design process changes. It becomes a collaborative effort with the manufacturer as you go back and forth discussing what is possible for the design to be. And by hacking a manufacturing system already in place, you don't waste resources on building a new assembly line, tools, etc. So, looking at what is possible to be created, such as angles of the tubes and the machines that produce these tubes, the tube sizes, what the factory is actually already using to make the Loopy bike rack chairs, we can collaboratively get to a point of creating a simple but extremely cheap chair. And not only that, it's an extremely durable chair. Also, these are going to hopefully launch in a couple months, so they're not out yet. But I'm really excited about these guys. So with these two projects, we can ask ourselves if we can reimagine what manufacturing means, where it happens, and who participates. This next project is the Replicate. This is a kit where you buy it for a significant other. In it, you will find a gold ring and a few digestives. Basically, if you drink the digestives and eat the ring blank, your digestive system does the rest. The digestives, like certain juices, are corrosive to gold, but not on your stomach. So you will slowly corrode the surface of the ring. By using your body's digestive tract as the manufacturing, you can create a very personal ring for your loved one. Basically, you're guaranteed to always get a custom ring after you locate it in your stool. Yes, this does border on a speculative project and is definitely gross, but what does this really mean for manufacturing? By using this, you're hijacking the quote unquote manufacturing that your body is already doing to digest food. Who says that manufacturing of objects need to be behind closed doors? I want people to know how their objects are made. Otherwise, people will take advantage of that mystery of production, which spawns bad labor practices, misinformed buyers, and using harmful materials. It is a chance to have less mystery in the object's origin and really have manufacturing to be part of the object's final destination. Another thing to remember is that manufacturing doesn't just mean produce design objects. All objects, natural or man-made, can be considered manufactured. And this definitely includes art pieces and how they come to be. This is my piece, the Race Rauschenberg art piece. For a little context, in 1972, Robert Rauschenberg approached this famous abstract expressionist, Willem de Kooning. He asked de Kooning for a drawing of his so he could erase it, and thereby destroying it. Robert wanted the act of erasure to be part of the art piece, a novel idea at the time. And so Willem de Kooning reluctantly agreed. This is Robert Rauschenberg with his erased de Kooning drawing, which now hangs in SF MoMA. The destruction as creating. What a beautiful manufacturing concept. But what does this mean to destroy a one-of-a-kind now, especially when we live in a manufactured world where factories can pump out replica after replica? I wanted to expand upon this idea of destruction as creating, but use the medium of our time, which is the internet. So to start out, perhaps if I destroyed a Robert Rauschenberg art piece, the person who had destroyed one before me, people would possibly be more forgiving. So that's what I set out to do. But how do you even start? I don't have enough money to buy a Robert Rauschenberg art piece, but maybe if I sold advertisements on the art piece, I could raise enough money to purchase that art piece and destroy it by printing the very ads that help me purchase it. The act of destruction becomes its value. So that's what I did. Each square inch was worth $100 or about as advertising space. You could send me an image of anything you wanted on a square and I would print it. Or people could buy multiple squares and display something larger, like there's a few phalluses on the art piece. The squares were purchased by a variety of individuals, and I then bought the art piece from the owner and printed over it. And at the time, I was at the New Museum's Art Incubator, New Ink, which the staff there hosted a gala event which helped me auction off the art piece. With the auction and a few bids later, we reached $21,000. In the end, I gave away all the proceeds of the auction as a scholarship fund for incoming artists at the museum. So we've talked about the product as manufacturing and the destruction as manufacturing, but what about the legalities of manufacturing? In order to protect your manufacturing process and products, typically one gets a patent. But what can a patent really do? Could I push the boundaries of a patent process? The obvious test was to go to the extreme and patent myself as a piece of furniture. So in order to do this, I needed to make precise schematics of what I actually look like to begin. Then I needed to design the furniture. This is what I would look like if I were a chair. This is what I would look like if I were a side table, a lounger, a coat rack, and a table. The next step is to visit the patent lawyer. Oh, the sound, I don't think is working. But basically, talked to a patent lawyer, and they were saying that the patent application can use a method of manufacturing instead of actually patenting your physical body. So it is possible, and that's kind of what we set out to do. The end up patent number 9692771, and we got the initial steps to patenting yourself as a method of manufacture for patenting one's body and as a furniture collection. So in the end, you can't really patent yourself, but you can do something pretty close. Also, side note, this project was a perfect way to turn myself into a meme, which I'm proud of, and the rest is history. So the next project is about tools and material sourcing. In manufacturing tools and equipment, these are the things that shape the material to its final form. But tools are products of themselves, and one will need different ones for different projects. So obviously, if you're making a wooden chair, you need woodworking tools and wood. If you're making a steel chair, you need welding tools. But both of the objects do just about the same thing. Let's take a stool. Generic stool uses about 30 different pieces that are shipped from all over the world and uses 5 different materials. Why does it take so much energy and materials and equipment to do so? To find out, I embarked on creating a stool from scratch. No tools, no equipment. Could I scratch, claw, and chew my way through creating a stool? After a few days, it came together. It barely stood upright, but it worked. The internet also thought it was pretty funny. So with that, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. A few years ago, I graduated from Brown University and RISD in their dual degree program. I got a BFA in industrial design at RISD and a BA in modern culture and media at Brown. After that, I kind of bounced around a little bit for the next 2 or 3 years, working in my own practice, and arrived at New Ink for a couple of years. And at that time, I was really enamored by the idea of making drawing tools, the manufacturing of drawing, and what that meant for the larger context of being able to put pen to paper and duplicate that process. I grew up in a family of architects, so I was always surrounded by weird drawing tools, French curves, and oddly shaped rulers. So I created the chalk drawers, which are now called Moonshock. They are architectural drawing tools that make original mark makings. One draws circles, one draws lines, and one draws dots. Interestingly enough, I actually started producing these at an Amish community in Kentucky. It was perfect for them. There was no technology required, no computers, simply a 2-part mold for each design, and you had a beautiful, useful object. And they also came in color. I started selling these myself originally. Here's me at ICFF selling them at the early stages with Design Milk. Here's ICF again. In 2019, I ended up licensing these to Areaware, and we switched the name to Moonshock, which is a lot less of a mouthful. And the reception has been awesome. This year, Koss actually made a collection of kids' clothing with the patterns. We have a hat, a dress, pants, shirt, the whole thing. This is truly amazing that this simple idea of drawing the unique mark-making aesthetic of these tools has blossomed into its literal own style, which I'm very proud of. I think that was the initial thing. I think making a product and getting it from point A to point B in terms of designing something is one thing, but getting it to have its own aesthetic and own identity is an entirely new thing that I didn't experience until making this project. And yes, the clothing is for kids, but I do fit in the largest size. Next are the Doodle Crayons, which just launched last month. And thank you, Hector, for getting a couple sets. That was very nice of you. Creating Doodle Crayons is a direct response to my views on art and making in general. The act of making art and the end result should really be unapologetic in subject matter and appearance. Thereby, art is allowed to be chaotic and purposeful in its messiness. These crayons are kind of a rebellion against the highbrow attitude of making art, which tends to scare people away from actually making the art. And again, this is the atomic crayon, which has a similar mindset to the Doodle Crayons. It also just looks like a crazy crayon gobstopper. So finally, we get to the wiggle pipe, which falls under the same aesthetic as the rest of these objects. Common critique of this is that culturally, we've seen the absurdist Memphis style one too many times, which I completely agree with. Been there, done that. But I do think the reason why I did this specifically and use the Memphis shapes is that they're simply not good for traditional manufacturing and really had me think of outside the box on how these things are made. You see these Memphis things, they're really only there for like a one-off object, but I think the idea of going out and trying to understand how to manufacture this really enticed me. And it was just so much more satisfying in the end when you're able to find the right way to produce something as absurd and out of this world as an object like this. That being said, it's porcelain. It uses a 2-part mold. It's very simple, economical, and has little waste in the end. And that is why I'm proud of this. So this is it for the manufacturing end of the talk. And I just wanted to show 2 client projects that I think kind of represents some of the storytelling that I've been doing throughout the past couple of years. This one is called the Pizza Box. It's a special pizza box I designed for a pizza startup. However, the startup was really into the legislation to legalize weed. The pizza box basically folded into a pipe to smoke weed out of. But the storytelling is what is important in this. It made its rounds on the internet, being the highest viewed thing on 420 in 2016. And even Snoop Dogg thought it was a pretty cool object. And because of this, a company called Ease in LA reached out. Ease is a medical marijuana delivery service, but wanted to tap into the younger crowd. So they created a company called Push for Kush. I don't know if the sound is going to work. I don't think it matters, but. Yeah. Okay, hold on one second. So you get the idea. Ease was this medical marijuana delivery service, but wanted to kind of tap into this younger crowd. So creating Push for Kush did that with an app that allowed you to buy weed at a push of a button. Very, very lowbrow, but it worked. They were paying to create a TV show, Push for Kush, as well to advertise this and reach out to the community of younger kids getting into this market. So they needed some storytelling objects to kind of tell the story on the TV show as advertising. So I pitched them a number of things and they decided on a specialty bong. This is the helium bong. It is first of its kind, designed by yours truly. As you get high, your voice also gets high. A very, very dumb concept. But they flew me out to LA and to film this TV show. And what's more crazy is that they wanted to film one of the episodes while hotboxing a helicopter as a triple high. Your voice is high, you are high, and you are literally high. Extremely stupid stuff, but it happened. The reason I show you this is to confirm that no one can ever say that a product designer's life needs to be tame in the least. Sadly, the TV show never released, and as these type of things do die in corporate settings, but we filmed everything and it turned out to be an extremely fun project that was really proud to be a part of. And that is it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it. That was very unique. Yeah, like I said, for those who are watching, we would love to hear your questions, but we can get started with this question that was asked by Emily Litton. Hi, Emily. Her question is, oftentimes becoming involved in things such as Milan Design Week or working with companies like Areaware require a good amount of credibility alongside beautiful work. How did you become involved in such things?
That's a good question. a lot of the projects I was actually doing in college, as I had a mild identity crisis in college where I was doing work that I was really proud of, but the identity of a student kind of stopped a lot of the things that could have happened. And what I ended up doing was kind of faking my way through my junior and senior year as pretending to be maybe slightly older, or kind of not having the student label, because I think it did impede a lot of this stuff. So I think one thing that happened, I think, was just I don't think getting rid of a student idea, or like understanding that you are a student, is important, but I think understanding other people's viewpoints is also important in that conversation. I think also being a student is extremely helpful in that, because if you're making really awesome work, it is just more power to you that you are doing it from a student's perspective, with student's budget and all that stuff. And I think each project you kind of have to curate how you present. And I think presentation, a lot of the things that I'm making, is 90% of the battle, where you have to understand what type of imagery the client or viewer will respond to correctly in the way that you want it to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm wondering also, as you were presenting your work, it looks like you are doing a lot of work and you're putting yourself out there. But how much time do you spend actually reaching out to the design media, or is that something that happens more organically now that a couple of these outlets have covered you? Are they expecting for you to continue to do this type of amazing work, or do you have to physically reach out and try to get featured either at Design Milk or any other anyone that writes about you?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold process. I think one, no one's gonna go out, even if you're a high level designer. I really don't think people are reporters will be like, oh, so what's the next thing? I think you really have to put yourself out there, and every single time you start from scratch every single time. I think I don't think I'm at the level that reporters are reaching out, being like, what is the next thing?
Mhm.
But I think just the culture of showing your work is also constantly changing. I think 5-6 years ago, I was looking at blogs a lot. Now I think focusing a little bit more on the social media aspect of just like person-to-person connections, I think, is important. I think there is a little bit of the self-promotion stuff, I think, which ebbs and flows in terms of how important that is, and how much you're willing to give to an audience. There are a number of product designers or people that you could call product designers that don't show anything, and I think that's also a practice in itself. And it is important for each person to do their own thing. Sometimes I think I show way too much, actually, and I think the mystery disappears a little bit.
Here's a question from Junior Casas. And the question is, through your presentation, you've already brought up the key points to answer these questions, but have you discovered and found your identity from your design style? Have you discovered or have a design style and will stand for it no matter what?
That's a great question. I think a number of the projects, the story drives the aesthetic. I did for a couple of years, obviously, get into that bubbly Memphis style aesthetic, and I think that was just a time and a place and a moment. I think the best designs are unique to the design. I mean, you have famous designers that have the same exact aesthetic over and over again, and that's slightly narcissistic in some ways. So I don't agree with that, but I do agree that if your goal is to have an audience respond to it in a certain way, and that is they are would like that aesthetic, and that's your goal, then that's the way to do it. So I think in the future, I really want to have a unique aesthetic to every single thing I make now. And I'm now in architecture school, I'm using like totally different things. I'm like designing buildings or parts of buildings. And I think one thing that's interesting is that sometimes aesthetic is like the last thing, or it is so much more part of the overall concept. And when you get into the nitty gritty parts of making something, sometimes it's hard to stand by some of those. So I think each project should rely on its own accord, I think.
Is humor part of the aesthetic?
Good question. Yes, I think humor is a great way to storytell, and I think that's something that something that I've been playing with quite a bit. I think you really need to start my design process. You really start kind of just telling jokes, telling stories, talking with people. What's the arc of the story that really hits and impacts people the most. Oftentimes it is a joke at the end of the day that excites people and gets people thinking about the comparison between a material like a book as being a stool or a stool as being a book. And I think there's always a little bit of humor, and if you can't see the humor, then the designer didn't do a good job.
Right. That's a very good point. Here's a follow-up question from Emily. And, Emily, she said that she works with high-level designers, and they constantly have to reach out to blogs and awards and design media nonstop to be published and be promoted. So yeah, that's definitely like its own job as well. Once you produce something, but she wants to know if you have any current projects in progress that you're excited about. And it looks like there's multiple people here that want to know what's next for Nick.
Yeah, over the summer of the pandemic, I was doing a number of small design objects. I think storytelling is one thing. You could tell one story really well, but I would love to tell a story periodically. And I think the next thing is to, I think my design process previously was design something, put it out there, design something, put it out there. It could take 3 months, and then I'll release to the world, or it could take a week and release to the world. But I think being slightly more consistent. So I have 10 projects that I'm going to release periodically. One of them is the Loopy bike rack chair. And I think the idea is that these all will exist as a set. When I did the All-Purpose Nick video series, I did them periodically, and I really enjoyed that process because it got you in the mix of making a thing, exhibiting the thing while you're also thinking about the next object. So there are a few small run objects that will come out periodically, which I'm really excited about.
You mentioned that you were as we speak, you're a graduate student in architecture. There's a question here by Chris. He wants to know, why go back to school for architecture?
Great question. I don't know. I think at the museum, when I was there for a couple of years, I felt like I was in kind of a creative rut in some ways. I think I was making work that looked too similar to the other things. I was creating an aesthetic, which was totally fine. I think totally valid. I do think that I was making things on the same scale as well. And I think the architecture school that I'm a part of at Columbia at GSAP is really great, because I think it takes the idea of creating a system and designing a system, whether that becomes a building, a group of houses. Right now I'm in a studio where we're creating public housing. So it's I see a lot of the architecture stuff that I'm doing right now is like system design, and I know that can be applied. I'm reluctant because I think that can be applied to many different types of products, whether that could be a spaceship or could be a small chalk toy or a house. I think there was a moment where I felt like I had did what I set out to do after graduating from college, and I felt slightly confused on what my next thing was. But I've been lucky enough that I think doing my private work and doing grad school has been relatively okay so far. It's been manageable.
Here's a question from Henry, and he'd like to know what it's been like to work on projects in the marijuana space that some may consider to be controversial. Has working on those projects led to insights that impacted your work style overall?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think when I was doing those projects, it was 4 or 5 years ago. The U.S. as a there were a lot of different. I don't know. The world was extremely different back then, and I think that working on projects that might be controversial is very important. I think asking those questions are extremely important. The project, the Bong or the TV show got canceled actually because the company was feeling a little bit like the world had shifted ideas of how weed was being represented in the world, and which it was definitely a moment in time where I think some reflection was required. And so I agree with their, even though we spent a lot of time on the project, I sometimes agree with some of their ideas of how they wanted to represent weed culture in these ways. I think if there's an opportunity, you can take it and really move it to the way that you see the world. I think there's a lot of opportunities that I think I said no to because I didn't fully understand what was being asked, or I didn't believe in the actual outcome of the project. So I think it's a case-by-case basis in a lot of sense. But I do think that doing culturally specific projects that really question the system that product exists in is important, whether it's just asking simple questions that don't that really help the user rethink their world in some ways.
Sure. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and obviously, probably best that we don't move or travel. But right now, you're in New York City. Is there another city that you'd be interested to ever move to or work in?
Yeah, I just became an Italian citizen actually, and I really want to work in Milan. I went to a few Milan Design Weeks, and not that that week happens every single week in the year, but I met a lot of amazing Milan designers, and I think the space there is really amazing. And I think a lot of the work that I make is internet based, meaning that it is disseminated on the internet, and place sometimes does not matter. So I think I could be, I could foresee myself existing in Milan. That would be absolutely amazing if that happened, but that would be a dream of mine to complete.
That's pretty cool. So I know you said you have a family of architects, and you're right now you're doing art, performing arts, and design. If you weren't doing any of that, what would you be doing as far as like career wise?
Yeah, I I don't know. I think as a younger kid, I went to Waldorf school. I went to some I had a lot of creative outlets, I think, as a younger kid. And I think a lot of that has really played into who I've become now in terms of how I understand objects in the world and how I interact with other people in the world. I I don't I have no other ambition other than to make uh, awesome objects, and whether that's a house or a small toy. So it's a great question. When someone says to a little kid what they want to be when they grow up, and they say astronaut or firefighter, I don't remember what I said. I think I said construction worker, but I always knew that I would be making something in any capacity in as a younger kid.
That's fantastic. Um, so going back to your undergraduate, uh, you know, education at RISD, RISD is a very artistic school. Even in design, it's not very traditional when it comes down to industrial design, um, which is fantastic. I feel like this topic or this conversation can go either way, 50-50. Some people say if you're a student in school, you should really focus and you should be ready to transition to industry. And the other half say if you're a student in school, you should explore, use this time to explore and really figure out what you want to do. I would love to hear about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I had a really unique experience at RISD because I was part of the jewelry program. So I was there for 5 years. I ended up going to modern culture media, which is a fancy couple words for the semiotics program at Brown. So RISD was actually relatively confining in what you do. You have to pick your major the second year. When you're in your major, you have to take a certain number of specific courses. But my senior year, I definitely would agree with the people who say explore things now, because when you're out in the real world, you're going to do that for quite a lot of time. And it was an amazing eye-opening experience to try a few out-of-the-box projects because you could. And I think it's also not for everyone. I think if you there are many instances where that doesn't apply, but for me specifically, I think I gained a lot of experience realizing that you could make out-of-the-box projects at an earlier age, and then that played a big part into my private practice afterwards.
Right. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing. That's a fantastic answer. Emily here has a very unique question. She'd like to know where you grew up, because she believes that the surroundings we grew up in can very much influence our aesthetic and ideas of beauty.
Yeah, I grew up in New York, Long Island, and Queens, basically. I I I think the thing that most resembles your question, I think, is my parents are architects and my grandparents were architects, and so I kind of lived underneath the table of my parents working metaphorically, and I think a lot of that time influenced how I perceive the world or what I'm capable of doing, and I think that um, alone has been an important way of navigating the world. Um, I also think that I have a brother and sister, and I think I've done a few collaborations with both of them. One of them is learning to be a chef as a design chef and making almost speculative design food objects. And my brother is working at a company called Mischief that do these amazing speculative products. And I think existing in that like hyper creative environment definitely was its own incubator in a sense. And I think that I wouldn't be the way I was without those connections and relationships, I think, as well.
That's awesome. It sounds like you have a very nice support system, and I think that's necessary. That's fantastic. Um, Henry has a follow-up question here. How do you personally make calls on what projects you work on? You mentioned that you turn down projects that you don't agree with the outcome. What does not agreeing with the outcome mean for you?
Yeah, good question. Uh, as a one-man band, in many instances, there was a time where you kind of have to make a lot of judgments by yourself in some ways, and I think that has led to issues on its own. because bouncing ideas off of someone is just so important and so helpful. And when I was at the new museum, I was doing my studio practice by myself. There was a year that I had some helping hands as well, but the time that I was by myself, it was really important to, I learned a lot of time management skills and just navigating the world of trying to make stuff reality by yourself. And it was just oh so important to just learn those skills. I remember realizing that I had projects due, and if I was sick, for instance, nothing gets done in the studio, quote unquote. Like it's either I do it or it doesn't happen. So there's a little bit of just trying to get everything done, and I think I definitely cut corners in a lot of stuff just because it was by myself. But I think for each studio, you have a studio practice, maybe you do it with a couple friends. I think each one has their own positives and negatives in how you handle each project and how you can say yes to no to certain things. Yeah.
Now, in your presentation, you talked a lot about the amazing work that you do, all the amazing success that you've garnered so far. I would love to hear a little bit about some of your biggest obstacles or challenges.
I think maintaining a projects that are not only meaningful but can sustain you as a practice. New Ink was a incubator, so the idea was that a number of artists, designers, studios would come there, and they would help facilitate them being economically viable, supportive community members that could create work, but also be supportive in their day-to-day life, put food on the table, keep electricity on. And I think that is something I am constantly still learning how to do in terms of how to manage what is a project that is important to me, but also can assist me in how the business is going. And I do not have a good answer on how to do any of that stuff. I still think I'm really, really bad at managing that. And that just goes with just being a single individual and trying to do a lot of things in not a lot of time. But no matter what, I think it is a difficult process. There are people that can do this, and I think that's the beauty of having the design world, where I think there's a number of people that have found those specific niches where it could be the weed world, where you're appreciated and those projects are fulfilling to you and fulfilling to yourself, and you can do the thing you had set out to do. And I think even though they were in a pandemic and world economics are hazy at the moment, I think that opportunities for designers are going to explode in the next couple of years, just because of this shift in how things are being made, what is needed over the next couple of years, new ideas of creating. And I'm really excited to actually see what happens coming in the next couple of years.
Fantastic. I have a couple more questions to ask you, and we can kind of wrap this up. The first question is, you had mentioned that you worked with Amish people in Kentucky. I would love to hear how you got in contact with Amish people.
Yeah, I think so. There's an Amish community in Kentucky. It's quite large, and there is a town nearby, and one of the people in the town runs one of the Amish community's factories. And she's not Amish herself, but manages the email and the outreach and all that. And it didn't come to me initially, but I was, in terms of the theme of manufacturing, the theme of trying to make unique products with like a viable end goal. It seemed like a very intriguing opportunity. So I ended up going to Kentucky, visiting the factory. Sadly, that's now the toys are not made there because it requires a little bit more machining now, but they're extremely precise now. The the Amish community was an amazing like 2-year experience, and they do make, you know, other things as well. So I hope to work with them in the future also.
That's pretty awesome. And my last question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give students?
I think making things that are I not that's a really good question. I think taking the syllabus of a class or taking an instruction from a teacher and really, you know, making it your own. I think that's something that I learned in college, and I really stood by. Was a teacher could say something, but the teacher is also a person who is also learning, also understanding the world through a certain specific set of time in the world. So I think that there to make really awesome projects, thinking outside of the box and thinking about what you are interested specifically, and not kind of gearing it towards maybe the class structure in general, could be a nice thing. I also don't want to, you know, don't stray away from what the teacher's actually trying to teach you. But I think making the college education or graduate school education your own and trying to blaze your own path in that is so much more important at the end of the time, I think, and just looking back and saying that you have a unique and original object. I think RISD, for instance, is amazing. However, some of the ID work at RISD all looks the same, and it is a common critique of the ID department, but that's for the sheer fact that they have rigorous classes that you take to get from point A to point B. And sometimes it's important to switch gears a little bit and understand that this is your work that you will exist with for your entire life. So it's important for you to do what you would like to do.
I couldn't agree more. I think students need to, and like you mentioned, the last 2 years of your education in school, students should start negotiating with their professors to make it their own, to make their brief or whatever syllabus or whatever project into their own, you know, take it into their own hands and design something so it doesn't, you know, not everyone in that classroom comes out with the same toaster or whatever. I think you kind of, you know, I think students need to question everything, and they need to figure out how they can make it a very unique object or product or experience. So that's a very good answer. But thank you so much, Nick. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful work. For those who,
Thank you.
thank you for your time. And this episode of Lens is recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube later this week. So if you missed out, be on the lookout for it, and we will see you at our next episode. So Nick, thank you so much. Have a good evening, and until next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.